Growing up, Frank Gehry loved physics, so he studied math, chemistry, and physics in high school. He even took up woodshop at some point. The place he studied at is in Canada, Toronto. Growing up, Frank Gehry loved physics. Growing up, Frank Gehry loved physics, so he studied math, chemistry, and physics in high school. He even took up woodshop at some point. The place he studied at was Growing up, Frank Gehry loved physics, so he studied math, chemistry, and physics in high school. He even took up woodshop at some point. The place he studied at was in Toronto, Canada, which also happens to be the place he was born and raised. Frank believed that if you know what you're getting yourself into, then it's not worth doing. So he would usually jump into the unknown and trust that it'll pay off despite the reverse outcome. So he picked up a few classes or courses, but quickly lost interest and dropped them. When Frank was a kid, his mother would usually take him to art museums and classical concerts, which is the reason why his buildings are expressed through forms of art that relate back to them. He also took night classes. During his studies, he would attend a lecture series in which he came across renowned architect Alvar Aalto, who gave him the idea of taking up architecture. Frank said the experience never made up his mind, but it certainly lighted a spark in him. In Frank's words, if you're going to be an architect, you have to learn the craft. Being a good architect includes the skill to build, engineering, and responsibility, and none of that can be achieved without discipline, so it all comes back to discipline. One of the famous quotes by Frank O. Gehry is, "The best advice I've ever received is to be yourself." So a good architect produces good work while staying true to themselves. Frank O. Gehry also mentioned he once stood in front of a statue called the Charioteer, a Greek statue, which is in Delphi. It was tall and it was 500 BC, and it made him cry. And he thought to himself, boy, that's what an architect should do, is be able to have an emotional response with their work that lasts through centuries.